Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening. I'm Wayne Kramer, the president of the board of the LBJ Museum of San Marcos, and it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome you to our third anniversary gala, our third annual gala. We're happy to have you here and hope you're having a good time. And if you're not having a good time, I suggest that bidding on an auction item would make you feel a lot better. And if you're feeling good, bidding on an auction item would make you even feel better. So please bid often. Remember the first rule of Gala, bid often. I would say that there's also the dining adventure, but Kristen Wingard went around to tables and sold all of those, so there's no more of those left. Sorry. The table arrangements are for sale. We're shameless here. You can pay $10 for that, take it home. Just see Debbie, our museum manager, in the back. You also will notice some Claudia Taylor endowment glasses on the table. We're willing to sell those as well. If you want to take one home, they're great for juice and also a little sip of whiskey. And so take those home and you can leave us a little donation on the table as well. I want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors. HEB is our primary sponsor. Ozona Bank. Melissa and Art Milliken, Texas State University, and the LBJ Debate Society here at Texas State. Go Bobcats! I'd also like to take a moment to recognize some of our special guests who are here with us this evening. First of all, Texas State University President Kelly Danfus. You know, he hit the ground running when he arrived in San Marcos and has made a very big impact on the university and also on the community. And as you know, in the fall, in September, Texas State will be hosting the first presidential debates. So thank you, Kelly, for being here. State Senator Judith Staffarini. Our state representative, Aaron Zwiener. Is Rebecca Belmetero here? State Board of Education member Rebecca Belmetero? No, she didn't come? Okay. Hayes County Judge Ruben Becerra. There's Ruben. Hayes County Commissioner Debbie Inglesby. Our County Constable David Peterson. David. County Clerk Elaine Cardenas. Our County Treasurer Daphne Tenorio. And Third Court of Appeals Justice Thomas Baker. From the City of San Marcos, Mayor Jane Houston. And Council members Mark Gleason, Matthew Mendoza, and Jude Prather. I'd also like to take a moment to recognize the other LBJ board members who are here in attendance. Michael Adams, is he here this evening? He was coming? Okay, so he couldn't make it. He's our newest board member. Not starting off good, no, just kidding. Ann Burnett. Kate Clayton, Ellie Dietz, Melissa Milliken, Brian Ray, and Judge Linda Rodriguez. You know, as we emerged from the pandemic, it became important for small museums like ours to find creative ways to remain viable in their communities. Partnerships are one of those ways, and we're excited to be partnering tonight with the LBJ Debate Society here at Texas State. So please join me in welcoming them. They're sitting out in the back corner there behaving themselves. I'm actually, well, not actually, but I'm figuratively wearing two hats tonight. I am the president of the museum, but I'm also the director of the LBJ Debate Society here at Texas State. The speech and debate team holds a unique place in Texas State history. We're one of the oldest organizations on campus. The first debate society, the Chautauqua Literary Society, began in 1903, the same year the university opened its doors. The Chautauquans split, Chautauqua and then Harris Blair. Read some of that early history. They had some pretty funny yells. But Lyndon was a member of the Harris Blairs and also a member of the varsity debate team. One of the slides that we shows Lyndon with his, he was a freshman at the time, along with his debate coach, Prof. H.M. Green, and his debate partner, who nobody seems to remember, but that was Elmer Graham. And Elmer Graham and LBJ gained notoriety that year by going to Sam Houston and beating their nationally ranked team. Prof. Green said, "We arranged it so that Lyndon would have the final say. When he got through with them, they didn't have a cockeyed point standing." Willard Deason, who was the senior class president at the time, recollected, "When ordinary men give up, Lyndon Johnson is just beginning." Now, Lyndon often said that his training in debate made him a more effective public servant and enabled him to be a steadfast advocate for others. And we're proud to carry on that tradition. The LBJ Debate Society has won 2 national team championships, congratulations to them, several individual national titles, and even an international title. So I'm very, very proud of them. And speaking of success, one of my favorite bits of wisdom comes from baseball legend and Hall of Famer Casey Stengel. He once said, "Ability is the art of getting credit for all the home runs somebody else hits." Now, our ability to hold this event this evening is due to all the home runs that my museum staff has been making. Our intern, Ellie Follis, and assistant manager, Anissa Adams, have remarkable batting averages, but the home run derby winner is our museum manager, Debbie Butler. She truly made this event happen, and we should all give her another round of applause. We had an excellent year of programming in 2023. Our second gala last January here in this building featured Obama's former Secretary of HUD and former Mayor of San Antonio, Julian Castro. The museum's lecture series, we have a spring and a fall lecture. Last spring, the spring lecture was Gene Schuler, who wrote the book At the Table with LBJ and Lady Bird, History, Humor, and True Texas Recipes. And so my museum board members made some of the recipes from the book, and we had a great time. Y'all should have been there. In the fall, we hosted David Vella, former superintendent at the LBJ National Historical Park, who spoke about his special relationship with the Johnson family, and in particularly with Lady Bird. Vella was the first Hispanic to serve as acting director of the National Park Service. April featured the 20th annual Ted Bryan Golf Tournament at Kissing Tree, which was a big success. We'll be doing it again this April. Show up. The museum also inaugurated our Summer Chautauqua series, our Summer Chautauqua program in June, with a presentation by Special Agent Michael Zark Markowitz of the U.S. Secret Service. He's with us here tonight. Thanks, Zark. In August, just in time for the anniversary of the signing of the Voting Rights Act, we featured the display Who Can Vote? A Brief History of Voting Rights in the United States. And that was from the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History with funding from the Annenberg Public Policy Center. The museum also participated in the wreath laying at the MLK-LBJ Crossroads on MLK Day last year, the Unity Walk for Juneteenth, and the wreath laying at the LBJ grave site at the Johnson Ranch on his birthday in August. So it was a grand year for the museum. I think we did well for a little bitty museum like we are. And we have bigger and better things to come in 2024, so please come by and visit us. And now what I've really been looking forward to is our speaker. Douglas Brinkley is the Catherine Sarnoff Brown Chair in Humanities and Professor of History at Rice University. He's also a contributing editor at Vanity Fair and a CNN presidential historian. CNN honored Brinkley as, quote, a man who knows more about the presidency than any man alive. He has received 7 honorary doctorates in American Studies. He works in many capacities in the world of public history, including for boards and museums, colleges, and historical societies. 6 of his books were named New York Times Notable Books of the Year, and 7 became New York Times bestsellers. I was watching a C-SPAN interview with him, and he said that he's a diplomatic historian by training, but that he didn't really want to be pigeonholed as such. And so he went on to say that he loves American history, he loves American literature, he loves American studies. And if you look at his list of books, my gosh, they're amazing. His body of work is astounding. It represents and follows those varied interests, and it demonstrates an incredibly broad research agenda. His book, The Great Deluge, Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans, and the Mississippi Gulf Coast, received the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Book Award. And he also, with regard to that, served as the historian for Spike Lee's documentary about Hurricane Katrina entitled When the Levee Broke. He was personally selected by Nancy Reagan to edit President Ronald Reagan's presidential diaries. His 2012 book on legendary broadcaster Walter Cronkite, entitled Cronkite, won the Fordham University's Aaron M. Sperber Prize for Outstanding Biographies and was a Washington Post Book of the Year. His 2-volume annotated The Nixon Tapes won the Arthur S. Link Warren F. Cool Prize. He also has this wonderful book on Jimmy Carter entitled The Unfinished Presidency, which looks at Carter's active and influential post-presidency. It's an amazing little book. Well, it's not little, but it's an amazing book. Side passion for Brinkley is jazz. And in 2017, he won a Grammy Award as co-producer of Presidential Suite, 8 Variations on Freedom by the Ted Nash Big Band, which won for Best Jazz Ensemble. He also has a Grammy nomination for a collaboration with Johnny Depp on a Hunter S. Thompson documentary. And the list goes on. It's amazing. The New York Historical Society selected Brinkley in 2017 as their official U.S. presidential historian. He is also on the board of the Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library and was named the inaugural historian in residence at the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. He's a member of the Century Association, the Council of Foreign Relations, the James Madison Council of the Library of Congress. His most recent book, Silent Spring Revolution, John F. Kennedy, Rachel Carson, Lyndon B. Johnson, Richard Nixon, and the Great Environmental Awakening, is actually the 3rd in a trilogy of books by Brinkley examining the intersection of presidential leadership and environmental politics. The Washington Post called the book, quote, an impressive narrative that transports readers to a different, more optimistic world of popular support for eco-awareness and collective action. The Post went on to say, it is a book that sticks with you. So it is indeed an honor and a pleasure to present someone who was described by Stephen Ambrose as the best of the new generation of American historians. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very lucky to have Douglas Brinkley as our speaker tonight.
Good evening. It's wonderful to be here. I'm a professor at Rice University, but my wife Ann, who is sitting here with me, and I live in Austin. So I've been commuting for about 20 years now, back and forth, but we raised our 3 kids in Austin. 2 are in college, and 1 is a senior in high school. And I love Texas State University, Ann Linden and Lady Bird Johnson. And so it's a real honor to have the president here tonight with us. Thank you, sir, for coming, and congratulations on getting that golden prize of the presidential debate, the first. Really impressive. It's going to make a big difference. I'm being nice to him now so I can get a ticket. Well, you know, they wanted me to talk for around 30 minutes, and as a professor, I can tend to babble, so I will really try to condense some of my thinking. But as mentioned in my introduction, I, I was really been looking, really grabbing by the scruff of the neck, the idea of conservation history, which is environmental history of today. One could ostensibly, and I've written articles and things, you could go back to indigenous people. It gets complicated, and it's a field of study unto itself. Since the Euro-American experience, you could pick up with Henry David Thoreau and Walden, and Thoreau's idea that in wildness is the preservation of the world. You can go to other figures, but for ostensible purposes of modernity and what matters in our life, everything in conservation began with Theodore Roosevelt, and LBJ would have agreed with that. TR had been born in New York City in 1858. In 1859, Charles Darwin wrote On the Origins of Species. And it was a revolution, that book. Still is, but it changed everybody's way of looking at flora, fauna, earth, life systems. But how many people can really focus on that in 1859 on the eve of the Civil War? You know, you weren't carrying Darwin at Shiloh in Antietam, you know. But in Theodore Roosevelt's family, that book was everything, because his father was creating the American Museum of Natural History in New York. He was the lead fundraiser with Albert Bickmore. So if you go to New York, that incredible institution, that's Theodore Roosevelt's father's long shadow. And TR started becoming the future president, a budding naturalist. He started by collecting bird skins and nests and eggs and the like, and leaves and flowers, and he kept upping his game. By the time he went to Harvard, he was majoring in what young people here would call wildlife biology. It was called naturalist studies, but that's what his interest was. But he spent most of his college years roaming around in nature. He'd go all the way to Carroll County, Iowa, grouse hunting, or he'd go following where Mount Katahdin, the tallest mountain in New England, where he'd climb to the top because Thoreau had, and very romanticizing outdoors and wilderness. But as an undergraduate, Theodore Roosevelt wrote his first book, The Summer Birds of the Adirondacks. And the big thing for TR, he would go eventually when his mother and wife died on Valentine's Day, the same day. Mother died of Bright's disease, kind of kidney failure, and his wife died giving childbirth. She had 104 fever and up and died, both within hours of each other. He lost the two women of his life. And historians like myself reread other people's mail for a living. And he put in his diary, once you see it, you never forget it, a giant X, and wrote under it, "The light has gone out of my life forever." Wallowing in depression, the baby survived, and his sister said, "I'll take care of the baby, Theodore. Go west, get fresh air, find yourself, heal." His brother had committed suicide. Theodore Roosevelt's brother, throwing himself out a window. There was a series of depression in the Roosevelt family. But he took the Western Vector, took the Northern Pacific Railroad, got off in the Dakota Territory, and spent his years in the West, developed two cattle ranches, the Maltese and the Elkhorn. And we now say the birth of modern conservation thinking was started in North Dakota when TR started writing and reflecting on it and acting upon it, because we used to have 60 million bison, and they had been slaughtered down to about 1,800. Everybody wanted to kill the bison. Why? Because for the railroads crossing the nation, the herds would go on the railroad and they hit a train and you lose your entire railroad. So they would hire people, the railroads, to kill the bison so they didn't cross tracks. Telegraph companies hated the bison because they loved to scratch their backs on their poles. They weigh a ton. They would knock the telegraph system over, so they hired people to get rid of them. And the U.S. Army wanted the extermination of the bison because in the so-called Indian Wars, that was a foodstuff of Plains Indians from the Comanche onto the the Sioux, Cheyenne, et cetera. So if you got rid of that in a sense of attrition, you would be able to help control the West. So they're gone. And TR started the American Bison Society. He started raising bison in the Bronx Zoo. And in fact, he brought all of these. It's very hard back then to raise a genetically perfect herd of bison because of their stomachs and winter. Yeah, it's just complicated more than you would think in modern life we would be able to do it. But they eventually got the herd, and they moved these 17 bison to Wichita Mountain, Oklahoma territory, Oklahoma. And he was there with, President Roosevelt was there with Quanah Parker, the great Comanche leader. And together they brought and started restoring the bison to the Great Plains. It's been a huge success story since. And it was the beginning of mammal restoration. And we started seeing with Theodore Roosevelt trying to bring back elk and moose. And he wrote a book as president on the deer family. And as president from 1901 to 1909, Theodore Roosevelt saved 234 million acres of wild America, meaning public lands. And you pull out a map, not of Texas, but look out west and you'll see half of these states like Idaho and Nevada and Oregon are all federal lands and preserves. Theodore Roosevelt created the National Forest Service and appointed Gifford Pinchot, the first chief forester, in a modern sense. He created national monuments, which is a mechanism. He stood at the lip of the Grand Canyon, TR, and said, "Do not touch it. God has made it. You will only mar it. Leave the Grand Canyon alone." And the Senate wanted to mine it for zinc, asbestos, and copper and would not create it as a national park. As a national park, you have to go through Congress. So Roosevelt, instead of being flummoxed, signed an executive order declaring an entire 1 million acre ecosystem a national monument. He got sued. It went multiple times. It goes to the courts and he wins. And that gives Theodore Roosevelt now this pen to start saving things like the great redwood trees of Muir Woods or Devil's Tower, Wyoming, and many more. He did get some through national parks, through Congress, like Crater Lake in Oregon or Wind Cave in South Dakota or Mesa Verde in Colorado. But his big legacy was today all of you here own 550 national wildlife refuges in U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And it's born with TR's first 51, starting with Pelican Island in Florida, trying to stop the plume hunters. Every woman in the audience tonight, if this was Roosevelt's presidency, let's just pick the year 1907, all of you would have come this evening to this event wearing a bonnet with an ornamental feather. They were slaughtering all the egrets and heron, flamingo, whatever they could to pluck those feathers. They'd steal the eggs, and species extinction was upon us. And Roosevelt started creating these federal reserves. One, like the Yukon one in Alaska, still is the size of West Virginia, deeding it to species. We've never had a conservation president like TR. You know, the teddy bear is his symbol. He was a hunter, outdoorsman, wrote about it, cared about it, elevated it as the big issue. And that gave us our first wave of conservation. The second wave of conservation in our country, we've had three waves, and I'm using conservation, but replace it with environmentalism if you want, was FDR from 1933 to 1942. And you could say to 45 if you want. I ended at 42 because that's when the Civilian Conservation Corps got defunded. But do you know the New Deal program, the CCC, that they ended up planning unemployed workers $1 a day? Do you realize that they planted nearly 3 billion trees, to combat the Dust Bowl conditions in the plains? They would do, kind of a big Z of woodlots and forest keeping all across the West and more. Do you realize FDR established 800 state parks during his presidency? And many of our iconic park sites in the national parks, from Everglades to, Great Smoky Mountains, Channel Islands in California, Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, Isle Royale, Michigan, on and on and on, are FDR. Eleanor Roosevelt, the great First Lady, used to write in her My Day column about nature all the time, birds, wildflowers. She was a big Audubonner. And that was this big second wave. The third wave is Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson at the forefront. Always know that LBJ admired the preservation efforts of both Roosevelts. And I'm sure all of you realize that, and as he did in so many things. But as a rancher here, LBJ grew up really, just loving the Texas Hill Country. He grew up caring about education and coming here and getting educated, and then coming back and teaching, particularly Mexican Americans in Texas. And his idea of conservation was about land stewardship, how somebody who has a ranch takes care of their property. And certainly fair chase hunting, understanding some of the great accomplishments of FDR as he got older. But Lady Bird, coming from the big thicket area, Louisiana-Texas border, she was a naturalist at heart from childhood onwards. She had a great sense of the Spanish moss or the alligators, the birds, the life there. It was just anybody who's been there even today, what remains of it, it's an extraordinary experience to go to the big thicket area. And that marriage between Lyndon and Lady Bird is consequential because together as a team, they both elevated conservation in a very large way in the 1960s, and we were all beneficiaries of it. What did LBJ do in that realm? Well, the first thing you need to know is that Kennedy picked Stuart Udall as Interior Secretary, and Udall now is ranked by most historians the greatest Interior Secretary in U.S. history. He would serve Kennedy and Johnson from Arizona. There's some people can argue Harold Ickes under FDR. But Kennedy did some things on the environment and conservation that were important. Mainly, Kennedy's big love were the Walden of Lyndon and Lady Bird was here. Their Walden Pond is Texas Hill Country. Kennedy's was the Atlantic seaboard. And in the spirit of seashore conservation, Kennedy did a very good job in 1961 of doing Cape Cod National Seashore in his home milieu. Then they came here to Texas and did Padre Island National Seashore. And then they did Point Reyes out in Marin. All those are hard to do when you're putting aside land mass along coast in the lower 48. It's a lot harder to get those done than, say, Jimmy Carter saving 1 million acres of high Brooks Range rock that no extraction company wants, that there's not a lot of flora and fauna depending on. But it's Lyndon Johnson, when Kennedy's killed in Dallas, people weren't sure how LBJ would be on the environment conservation. He over-delivered on this area by a long shot. First off, he had read, even though he loved dams, built his career on dams, so did FDR. The dams were part of the New Deal, the Grand Coulee Dam and Tennessee Valley Authority, rural electrification and all of this. He had read a 1960 book by John Graves, Goodbye to the River, about a river dammed in Texas, and LBJ was touched by it. His literary hero, John Steinbeck, was very big on how to preserve land and biology, and Edward Rickey's. But he came in 64, and with Lady Bird chose, after playing around with education and things, decided to be known as the First Lady for beautification, for conservation, for national parks. And the two of them did all sorts of great things in this realm from 64. Actually, they did it from December 63 till they left the White House. I say December 63 because after Kennedy died, Johnson pushed and got our first Clean Air Act passed in December 1963, which created standards for pollution that's acceptable for human health from stationary sources, meaning factories. It did not deal with automobiles. That doesn't happen until Nixon in 1970, but still it's a big opening moment. 64, they're pushing on big projects like Canyonlands. Johnson brings into being Canyonlands in Utah, one of the great national parks. He'll go on and create Guadalupe National Park here in Texas. They'll push the progenitors of the big thicket here in Texas as a national preserve. He will go with Lady Bird leading the charge to establish Redwoods National Park in Northern California. If you go there, it's the Lady Bird Grove, and this was a hard one to get done. And there's Lyndon and Lady Bird getting it done. The hardest of hard is the North Cascades National Park up in Washington State. Massive, outside of Seattle, a kind of alpine wilderness that some people will say is the prettiest mountain scenery in North America and among the best in the world. And instead of it being logged, it got preserved because of Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson joining that particular cause. But the most impressive things LBJ did, I think, in retrospect, are his fights for more seashores and lake shores. Nobody did lakeshore conservation. And Lyndon took a deep interest in it, but he was able to establish on ocean seashores places like Fire Island in New York, Assateague in Virginia, Maine, and many more. But on lakeshore, he saved the Great Lakes. There were no national parks in the Great Lakes. It was not thought of conservation there, although Johnson weighed in with Senator Paul Douglas of Illinois, and the old poet Carl Sandburg joined the cause. And they saved places like the Apostle Islands, 22 islands in northern Wisconsin, Indiana Dunes along Lake Michigan, Picture Island in Michigan, Sleeping Bear Dunes that recently Good Morning America called the most beautiful spot in America, those big rolling dunes in very near Traverse City, Michigan. These are all LBJ, LBJ, LBJ. He's pushing public health. And when you do pollution regulation, he's embracing the spirit of Rachel Carson, who in 1962 published the book Silent Spring. And in it, it told us, it's not just saving the great Sleeping Bear Dunes in Michigan, that's conservation, but the new way you have to have public health in mind, meaning Rachel Carson, Lyndon Johnson, and Lady Bird were telling Americans, your kids can be getting sick in their backyard due to pesticides, DDT, toxic waste. It's the beginnings of what today we term environmental justice. Keep in mind, in the Johnson years, you had Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta protesting out about pesticides deforming kids in the imperial San Joaquin valleys of California. You had Martin Luther King in Memphis getting shot for a sanitation worker strike because part of it wasn't just about pay, it was about all of the garbage of Memphis was being dumped on people of color. I talked to Andy Young and John Lewis, and they both, Dr. Martin Luther King's great associates, had said, look, the Montgomery bus boycott of Rosa Parks is, we didn't want to sit in the back of the bus because that's where the diesel fumes came in. There's no air conditioning. It's 100 degrees and diesel's hitting, fumes are making us dizzy, sick, burning our eyes. So when you're doing civil rights acts like Lyndon Johnson did, you're addressing equality in every single facet possible. He pushed for the Air Qualities Acts. Most significantly and interesting and buried in history, it's Lyndon Johnson who passes the first Endangered Species Act. He does it in 66, 67. It's the beginning of saving our creatures of America. whether it's manatee or alligator or whooping cranes or trumpeter swans. The list is long and mighty, and it's all over. He doesn't get credit because it got updated in 1973 during the Nixon years. So usually in legislation, the last one is the big hurrah. But the crux of it was Lyndon Johnson. Cut to the fact, guys, it's 1968. Lyndon Johnson shocks us in March by saying he's not going to run for re-election due to the albatross of the Vietnam War, due perhaps to the shock of the Tet Offensive, and really due to the fact his heart was bad, his health was bad. Lady Bird says enough is enough, and it seemed unseemly for him to go campaigning door to door with that kind of war going on. And you know what happens in 1968 in Chicago. There's no Lyndon Johnson, and things are unraveling in Chicago. Whether it's Bobby Kennedy had been killed, Martin Luther King Kennedy had been killed, Lyndon not running, Hubert Humphrey gets the nomination. He has to run against Nixon in '68 and George Wallace, who created a third party. A lot going on. In history, our shorthand for 1968, we call it the tumultuous year. Do you realize that that fall, Lyndon Johnson was working conservation front nonstop? And I'm not talking just a park. He pushes through and creates our nation's wild and scenic river system. All of our rivers that aren't ruined right now in 2023, that still have salmon runs or clean water fishing or turtle life, or it's an amazing system, the wild and scenic river system. It's the first time we were giving the love, respect, protection, preservation of our rivers, that they just weren't sewage canals or places to navigate barges or ships, that they were places that had a kind of holy relevance to what we consider America the Beautiful. Do you realize that in '68, in addition to all those wild and scenic rivers, Johnson creates our national trail system and saves the Appalachian Trails, Pacific Coast Trail, all the Western trails that we have? These are big events that just get hidden in news because '68 is so hurly-burly. Lady Bird Johnson fares better in the '60s because she's not blamed for Vietnam. And she goes places, as you know, on beautification, talking about planting wildflowers, keeping our highways litter-free, historic preservation of places like San Antonio and New Orleans were big for Lady Bird Johnson. She would go to Northern California and say, don't ruin Pacific Coast Highway 1. Stop the vulgarity of the American roadside. And she just became the greatest champion you can imagine. And we, of course, honor her here in San Marcos. And we honor her at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center just down the road. And we honor her in Austin, because without Lady Bird, there's no Zilker Park of today. And without Zilker Park, you're not going to see Austin marked as one of the best places to live. It's Lady Bird's spirit, and it continued here in the Hill Country, and our love of our American landscapes. There's been never a first lady like her. She was a great conservationist in every sense of the word and made a huge difference. Why then isn't LBJ mentioned with Theodore Roosevelt, FDR, Lyndon Johnson? They're the big three of conservation. And in many ways, TR first always get more credit, right? Neil Armstrong's always going to get more credit than Buzz Aldrin. It's just life. But really, Johnson's productivity in this realm equals FDR, and he was only there for a term in a year. One problem Johnson had was I don't think he had the press. I don't think he knew stagecraft of it. And when he's signing Wild and Scenic Rivers, they didn't position him by a wild and scenic river to do an interview. It's just done in a White House pen signing ceremony so the pen can go on a wall at the Johnson Library with all these others, but it lost the drama of the moment. You would see Ronald Reagan with Michael Deaver do stagecraft well. Kennedy did stagecraft well. They missed it on this front, so he lost some of the credit for it. And also because this love of America and conservation was just obfuscated by Vietnam. It was very hard for Lyndon Johnson's other accomplishments to get the front and center that it deserved. But there's been no president since that has equaled Johnson in this realm. And of course, you're lucky that he came back here after the presidency, and you can go to the ranch and walk along the Pedernales River. And if some of you really, most of you probably have discovered the beauty of Texas, that not everybody up north understands. They see it as cowboys, some cactus, some rock. They're not seeing the rich biological, beauty and richness of Texas. That's something that Lyndon and Lady Bird knew. It was in their DNA. And so it's one reason I wanted to be here for your third annual speaker is to tell you you're doing great by having this museum of reminding people, particularly at a great university like Texas State, of the environmental and natural resource management and beautification heritage of Lady Bird and Lyndon, and you're keeping their stars shining brightly here, and hopefully more young people will learn about their legacy. And I promise you, when the debate comes rolling around, your guys are going to be getting stories galore about what your university is about. And I know there'll be stories galore about Lyndon Johnson as a teacher and about his time at San Marcos. I just hope that expands to understanding what Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson have meant to protecting American living creatures and waterways and forest, and their love of country extended beyond the political realm into the really spiritual realm of our natural kingdom. Thank you all.
Thank you, Doug. Last April, Ann Burnett and I had the opportunity to meet Doug at the Hofstra Conference on the Obama presidency. He was very gracious in saying that, oh, by the way, I'm just up in Austin. If you ever need a speaker, give me a call. Word to the wise, don't ever make that type of offer to me, because I will take you up on it. But he was very gracious to do that. We really appreciate you being here. You don't know how much we really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, silent auction awaits. Debbie, what time is it closed? You got 15 minutes. Outbid everybody. All right. Thank y'all all for being here. We hope to see you next year. And we also hope to see you at the museum throughout the year. Please come, join us, visit us, and sit and speak with us or talk with us or whatever. Just enjoy it. Thank y'all very much. Have a good evening.